Hey there, everybody. Bloody Bill Vox coming at you. In fact, as I record this episode, I don't even have an official title for this podcast, video podcast, whatever the hell it's going to be. It's just some sort of brainchild that has been sitting in my brain for quite a while and decided to finally go ahead and put it to use. If you're unfamiliar with me, and I'm sure many of you are, because I'm not even a pimple on the radar, but my name is Bloody Bill Vox. I'm a former professional wrestler, former a lot of different things, but the former professional wrestler part is where I really lean in because it's former POS wrestler turned current POS content creator. And see, look how POS we are. I can't even really talk properly, but that's okay. Because I am going to just run on the assumption that nobody really knows who I am. Let me give you a little bit of background on who I am and what I'm looking to do here in this podcast. So as I said, my name is Bloody Bill Vox. I used to be a professional wrestler for a brief period of time. I was in a tag team known as the Era of Violence with my tag team partner, the ultra-violent assassin Rob Marsh, and our manager, Greatness himself, Chad Epic. We were pretty much up in the state of Maine for the most part. We did dabble in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, a little bit here and there, but for the most part, we were in Maine. We had a nice run together. We won tag team titles one time, which was the only goal I ever really had of being in a tag team with Rob Marsh, because he's somebody that I've been friends with going back to 2006. And we started going out on the road together in 2016. And that run lasted only a couple of years because I got a lot of concussion issues. But in addition to being a professional wrestling participant previously, I've been a fan of professional wrestling since 1990 when I was 5 years old. So part of the perspective that I bring to whatever this podcast is going to be is, at this point, 33 years of fandom almost. The first event that I ever watched in full was SummerSlam 1990. The wrestlers that caught my attention in that were Bret the Hitman Hart, Mr. Perfect, and the Texas Tornado. It was actually Mr. Perfect and the Texas Tornado were the reason that I became a big-time fan of the classic Intercontinental Championship that many people still hold in high regard to this day. In fact, Cody Rhodes brought it back as a championship at one point in time. He had it on a white strap, and something about that match, it wasn't even necessarily a classic per se. It wasn't even anything crazy over the top or anything like that. It was just something about the belt, something about Mr. Perfect, and even Texas Tornado. I remember finding this piece of like rubber at the beach that was shaped like a championship belt very shortly after I had seen this. This might have even been in summer of 1991. But I remember finding this piece of like rubber on the beach, and it was shaped like a championship belt, and I was running around on the beach with this championship belt, and I could hear the Texas Tornado theme in my head. So it was those three guys that initially got me into wrestling. But once I got into it, it was full speed ahead. I watched everything that I could, whether it was WWE, whether it was WCW, whether it was little syndicated shows of local independents. For example, to this day, I can't hear Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen without being taken back to a local syndicated show. It was on WNDS TV. I think it was like Channel 50 or something. Here in New Hampshire, it was a station out of Derry. In fact, we had a very famous weatherman, Al Caprillion, who used to be on that station. That was like that station's claim to fame. Good evening. And that was not even a really good impression of Al Caprillion, but on that station, they would air old wrestling every once in a while. And the wrestling that we got to see one time happened to have the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase. Except the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase was not the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase in this. Even though I had just watched him in an episode of Superstars of Wrestling or Wrestling Challenge, this was a different Ted DiBiase, and he came out to Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen. And I did not understand that this was old, I think, Mid-South footage. I could be wrong on that, but I think it was an old Mid-South broadcast that was syndicated into some sort of collection show or whatever, and that's why it was airing. So, of course, it creates all this confusion for me. I'm like, wait a minute. Does that mean that he's wrestling in the WWF as the $1 Million Man, and he's wrestling somewhere else as just himself and this different character? I was very confused. I didn't understand, what had been before the WWF, WWE, the way that I understand it now to this day. So that created such a confusion for me. But that little sidebar story aside, once I discovered wrestling, it was, like I said, full speed ahead. And, I got to see, a Christmas that was full of nothing but WWE merchandise because of my fandom. And even prior to being able to have that fandom really supported by my family through merchandise and toys and all of that stuff, any chance I got to watch wrestling, I took it. If I could sneak out of bed at night to watch a Clash of the Champions on TBS, you bet I would do it. If I was supposed to be vacuuming the living room on a Saturday morning instead of watching TV, guess what? I'd put WCW's TBS Saturday morning show on the TV on mute. I think it was Power Hour, maybe. But it was wrestling all the way through. And it got to the point with my wrestling fandom that my mother actually took wrestling away from me. I was having some other behavioral issues, if I recall. And so to curb those issues, but also go after what my family felt was an obsession, we took wrestling away, which only made it worse. Because then I was sneaking to watch everything. I was sneaking the content anywhere, which way I could. There was no keeping me from professional wrestling, and there's really been no keeping me from professional wrestling over the last 33 years. Part of the point of this podcast is to kind of share that love of professional wrestling via revisiting old video games, which was the side topic for this first episode. This first pilot episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about myself, my background as a fan in wrestling, and then get into a video game that is wrestling related that I can talk at length about and have memories about, which, for the sake of forwarding ourselves ahead, that's going to be WWF Wrestlemania on the Nintendo, which was the very first wrestling game that I ever got to play, and I thought it was a great first episode game to cover because there was a lot going on in my life at that point in time. So I have memories of that, of a Disney movie at the same time also, and then just kind of what was going on in life at the time. It was a wild time for me. This was right around when I first got into wrestling as well. But we'll get to that in a little bit. Continuing a little bit on this portion of, me, the broadcaster, old Bloody Bill Vox here. Like I said, 33 years of being a professional wrestling fan. I've been to many different events. I've been fortunate enough to see many infamous moments in person. Start of the Austin era in 1998 at WrestleMania 14, and even before that, I saw Steve Austin throw the Intercontinental Championship off the bridge in New Hampshire. That was at the Whittemore Center. Well, he didn't throw it off at the Whittemore Center, but the event was at the Whittemore Center in Durham. And somebody went and fished that belt out and tried to sell it back to the WWE. But if I recall that story, it was a prop belt. Like, it had no value, and that's why they hucked it off the bridge. I've been to, like I said, I've been to WrestleManias. I've been to King of the Rings. I've been to, one King of the Ring, 2000. Got to see Kurt Angle win the King of the Ring there. Been to a bunch of Monday Night Raws during the Attitude Era. Saw Vince McMahon as the higher power in Boston. Most of these moments happen in Boston. I've been to a few events in Worcester. Been a couple in Lowell. For a few years, I was making an annual trip to Brooklyn for the NXT TakeOver events, and then that spiraled into NXT TakeOver and SummerSlam. The very first year was when Jushin Thunder Liger appeared, and fortunate enough to say that I got to see Liger's one and only in-ring WWE appearance. He had never made an appearance prior to that, and he never made another in-ring appearance after that, and I'm fortunate enough to say I was there in the Barclays Center for that match, which also was the same night that Bayley and Sasha Banks, now Mercedes Moné, had their classic match. I always felt like, and I like that this happened, I always felt like that they might have gone long and taken away from the main event, because the ladder match that night in Brooklyn really felt a little bit rushed considering the story they had leading in. But lots of attending wrestling over the years. The room that I'm sitting in right now to record this pilot episode is covered in wrestling memorabilia. Just, quick summarization, event posters for NXT Halloween Havoc, Survivor Series 91, NXT In Your House, Survivor Series 88, WrestleMania 5, In Your House, Buried Alive, SummerSlam 88, Rumble 91, Rumble 92, WrestleFest 88. There's a lot of wrestling in this room. I'm looking at an Undertaker. I've got some pops. I got championship belts behind me. Like I said, for 33 years, there's been no keeping me away from the world of professional wrestling. And, always looking for new ways to share that love, especially in the last couple of years where, we've all become a little bit more distant. Thanks to global pandemics and just general changing in the way we all live. It was during the pandemic, the height of it all, when everybody's locked down and, in their homes and everything, that I started to discover the world of streaming as another way of not only performing, because my days of performing in the world of wrestling were over, but also as another way to share my love of professional wrestling, but with new people. So I established a Twitch channel, which, as it turns out, I have had a Twitch channel for almost 10 years. Apparently, I established one back somewhere around 2014. According to a recent check that I did. I've had a Twitch account, might have even started as a Justin.tv. For those of you old enough to remember that. But I reestablished and at first I was, kind of varietying myself around. I was playing a little bit of everything because I didn't really know where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do, what I was even going to do. Because a friend of mine, Big Ricker Gaming is his gamer tag, but it is also known as, in the wrestling world, is Aftershock Adam Ricker or Big Ricker. But Adam is one of my best friends in life, and he was doing the streaming thing fairly regularly at this point in time, and he just made it seem really fun. I didn't have any illusions or ideas of trying to turn it into a career or anything like that. Never knew that, any old Joe off the street could make money doing it. I just thought it would be a fun prospect to kind of jump in, see what would happen, and go from there. And I started off with a different name, and then I decided to go full on wrestling mode. So my gamer tag, my streamer tag, whatever you want to call it, for a little while. Excuse me. I'm going to take a sip of water every once in a while. We'll see how that translates. Might have to just cut out those moments in post, you know? But anyway, so I changed the gamer tag, streamer tag, whatever, to WrestleVox because I liked having my name involved in it. So I thought that was a good name to give myself because I was going to be doing just wrestling content and it was going to be fine. Fast forward through all of that, the end result, I got burned out on the streaming experience, the networking with other people. I could do an entire podcast just on the complexities of streaming that I've seen since I got involved with Twitch and YouTube, and even more recently starting to get involved with Kick. I got burned out on everything, and I almost didn't want to do simply wrestling anymore. But I also felt like I was kind of losing my identity. Is weird or dramatic as they may sound, by just referring to myself as WrestleVox, and it's your favorite neighborhood wrestling weirdo, or whatever, your favorite neighborhood wrestling weirdo. That's what it was. I started to feel like I was getting lost in that gimmick. Because it felt like a gimmick. It was starting to not feel like a real extension of myself. So I forget exactly when it was, but I took a little sabbatical. I wasn't creating any content at all. I was just, laying low. And somewhere along the line, I decided, I was like, I should have kept the name that I performed with in wrestling when I first started doing this broadcasting thing. So I made the call to bring Bloody Bill Vox back to life. I still had, I had logos, I had, art, I had whatever I could use to help build almost a new brand in the broadcasting realm. And that's when Bloody Bill Vox re-entered, so to speak, after being left dormant for a while. And it's been through that kind of journey that led me back to, like, as I like to say on my social media pages, all things pro wrestling and occasionally things not wrestling. And that occasionally is very few and far between. But I think in that realm with sharing the wrestling and everything, sometimes you feel like you need a break from wrestling. And so there's almost a rhetoric in streaming where you need to pick one certain solitary thing. And so I was picking that wrestling thing, but hey, as lovers of wrestling, I think we can all attest to the fact that every once in a while we get burned out on it, and we need to allow us that flexibility to do what we're going to do, especially in the world of content creation. Because if you're burnt out on something, what good is it going to do you to keep creating it if you're burnt out on it? You got to take a break. You got to find a different thing. And some people will argue, well, if you do too many different things, people won't know what you are there for. But if you keep a pie where it's 90% one thing and 5% another and 5% a third thing, well, then I think they know that the majority of your pie is one thing, and every once in a while you might offer a different slice. So that's kind of my content creation background, the different names, why we got into it. And, basically at the end of the day, it was just trying to find a new way to share my love, my perspective, my experience in pro wrestling, both as a fan and a participant. I've been involved in production. I've been involved in creative. I've attended events. I've met wrestlers. I've worked with wrestlers. So this content creation realm is just a different way to share all that with everybody. And, it may sound very cliche, but if something pops off from it and I could make real, job money from doing it, I would love to. But so far I've been lucky enough to have some folks that continue to tune in on a very regular basis. to what I do, both on Twitch and on YouTube. On YouTube, I do a fantasy wrestling show, which is very basically called WWE 2K23 right now. WWE 2K23 Fantasy Warfare. I put up new episodes every Friday. Depending on when this episode posts, the current season may be over, or it may be nearing an end. But typically we put out 6 matches every Friday and then a bonus match on Mondays. I reveal the card on Wednesdays. And so that's what's going on over on YouTube. And I lost my train of thought there for a second there, so I apologize for that pause. What I was trying to say is that I've been lucky enough to have some people that enjoy listening to me talk. They tune into the streams. They tune into the YouTube stuff. They support via shares and likes and commenting. I've even been lucky enough to have to file streaming money on my taxes. Weird to say lucky enough, but that means that somewhere along the line, people thought that what I was doing was worth a few bucks. And that's simply really, really cool to me. That anybody, anytime, anywhere would ever think that what I'm doing is worth a few bucks. Call it validation, call it whatever you want. I'll call it cool. So yeah, that's I think that's a good, nice, healthy front end part of this episode. Our pilot here of the unnamed podcast. Hopefully I have a name for it by the time I post it, and you've at least got it at the front end. I know a couple of names I was kicking around was 8 Bits and Dropkicks, which I liked it, but I'll cover games that aren't 8-bit. I think I had 8 Bits and Dropkicks because the first game that I was thinking about covering was WrestleMania for the Nintendo. Then there's also Dropkicks and Joysticks, which I thought was a nice play on, covering wrestling and the wrestling games. Generic enough, but either way, before we get into the WrestleMania part of the episode here, if you would like to follow me on social media, my goodness, I'm just about everywhere that I can think of right now, but I'm sure I'm missing one of them. But for the sake of making it easy for you to find me, you can find me in the following places by going and looking for the handle at Bloody Bill Vox. And the last name is V as in Victor, AUX. I mean, it's all over my social medias, but if you're only listening to me for the first time, you might think my last name is Fox, like crazy like a fox. And I am crazy like a fox, but my last name is VAUX. V as in Victor, AUX, baby. Anyway, these are the places you can find me. Twitch, YouTube, Kick, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I'm on the PlayStation Network. We got Ko-fi, and we've also got Teespring, in case you want to buy yourself some Bloody Bill Vox merchandise. Add to the international takeover. We got a Bloody Bill Vox shirt kicking around in Scotland. Like, that's pretty damn cool. Scotland. Damn Scotland, of all things. All right, on that note, I think it's about time that we fire up the Nintendo. This portion of the podcast will have a little bit of a video accompanying to it. I know you've been staring at a screen if you're watching on YouTube, and a logo for the last 20 minutes. And if you are listening along in audio format, you'll be able to hear the game. You just won't be able to see it. But for this pilot episode, I wanted to share my experiences, my reviews, some stories around WWF Wrestlemania on the Nintendo, which was the very first game that I ever played as a kid. And I've many times told the story on streams that the first game that I ever owned was Royal Rumble on the Super Nintendo. But the first game that I ever played was WWF Wrestlemania on the Nintendo. Now, this was during, like I said earlier on in this episode, this was a wild time in life. I won't go into the specifics of it, but it was at a point in time where I was not able to live with my mother. She was having some health issues, and I had to live with a family member. And I was pretty beat up about this because, you know, I was only 5 years old and being separated from my mother because she's not feeling well and she's just not able to take care of things. And so she's off getting the help that, you know, she needed to feel better. And, you know, I was living with, to this day, and I'm sure I could ask this question and be refreshed, but I don't know what the official relationship is, but it was one of those people we called auntie, right? And so I was living with this auntie, and auntie was trying her best to make things not so miserable for me. This was in... this was probably in 1990 or 1991, because I think I was in kindergarten. And I was in kindergarten when this was going down. So, WrestleMania on the Nintendo had already been out for a couple of years at this point. Maybe a year, maybe two, depending on when the timeline lines up. I want to say it was late 1990. But I don't really remember that era of life, and I'm sure we block it out for, you know, whatever the reasons. But so WrestleMania had been out for 2 years at that point in time, because in my research about this game, I see that it came out in 1989. So by the time I'm playing it, I'm watching an entirely different WWF on television, which leads me to believe more this had to be 1991, because I remember watching a lot of different programming at this auntie's house in 1991, including primetime wrestling. But so I'm going to guess that this was 1991 that I'm playing it. And I just remember, like, being so enthralled with it. Now, looking back at this game, especially if we compare it to, you know, even if we compare it to, say, a PlayStation 2 era game versus a PlayStation 5 era game, it's like, you know, daytime, midday, and nighttime kind of stuff, like the extreme differences between all of them. WrestleMania on the Nintendo, if you break it down, really is a terrible game. I still, to this day, have never beaten the tournament mode, and I'm actively trying in the video that's accompanying this podcast, because I'm not sure that it will always be like this, but sometimes I think the video will just be me repeatedly trying to play certain parts of the game, or in other cases, if I have specific memories about, like, menus or music or whatever, we might do a more targeted approach to the gameplay. But right now, as you probably are seeing, depending on where we are in the video, I'm probably losing. Maybe I've won. Either way. But to this day, I've never beaten that mode. But I can just remember, like, sitting down in front of a TV cart, you know, because everybody had a TV cart back in those days. It was a TV cart with a brown television on it, probably, I don't know, 17-inch screen, maybe. The Nintendo hooked up to it. I think there was a VCR, because I played WrestleMania on repeat, and I played The Jungle Book from Disney, the VHS, on repeat. The bare necessities, to this day, takes me back to that room. I don't remember much about the room itself, other than the TV, because that's where I was coping with what was going on. was in front of that TV. But I just remember sitting down, little 5-year-old me, legs crossed, Nintendo controller between my legs, and I'm just sitting there playing as all these guys that I, remember, liking at the time or being afraid of at the time, like Andre the Giant scared the ever-living shit out of me. I think that might be my first curse of the podcast. Not bad. Made it a little over 30 minutes in before we dropped a bomb. Not too bad, not too bad. Probably won't always be as clean, but I'm also trying. So, but Andre scared the shit out of me. We have to drop one there for that. But I just remember sitting there playing matches repeatedly. I can't tell you if I can't tell you what I won. I can't tell you what I lost. I can tell you I never beat the game. But just sitting there watching those pixelated little beans just move back and forth on the screen, there was something about it that, to this day, like I said, I can paint the picture for you of the game, of my memories of it, where I'm just sitting down on a carpeted floor. I know it was carpeted, and the TV stand was in like the middle of the room, and I'm just sitting there watching these beans going back and forth, trying to catch the little, prize things that would keep falling to try and up your health level. The 8-bit theme songs of like Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage and the $1 Million Man, which was cool because they couldn't be exact theme songs, right? They weren't exact, but they were enough of the melody that you could really listen to it. In fact, you've probably heard a bunch of them throughout the video portion of this podcast, with the game being played. Hogan's theme, Savage theme, Bam Bam Bigelow, $1 Million Man, the Honky Tonk Man, all those different theme songs. It was just, I almost feel like I'm not doing it justice because it's an image that maybe you can relate as a listener to, just an image where it's just burned in your head, and you can talk about how you loved the memory, but you can't convey properly justice to the memory itself, so that way the person listening understands why it means so much. The best thing, or the best example that I can give here about WrestleMania, the Nintendo game, is the game was an escape, and still to this day, I think it's a terrible game. It's so limited in its functionality. It's a real pain in the ass to try and beat that tournament mode, and I know it can be done. So before anybody comes at me saying, oh, you just need to get good, I understand. I need to get good. But despite all of the shortcomings of that game, the glitching out that it will do, just the wonky controls, the pins, everything that sucks about that game, despite it all, that game just holds a special memory for me because of the escape that it provided at the time. Like, up until that point, I'd only been able to watch these wrestlers on television. I'd never been able to hold them in my hand, essentially, like you were able to do in the video games. When you had that Nintendo controller in your hand, it was like holding Hulk Hogan in your hand or Randy Savage in your hand and controlling their actions. And granted, in WrestleMania, it was very, very limited. It was like punch, kick, clothesline. Some guys could jump off the top, like Andre and Bam Bam Bigelow could not jump off the top rope. So there was a lot of limitation to the game, but man, getting to sit there and watch, say, Hulk Hogan on Wrestling Challenge or Superstars of Wrestling or even Primetime Wrestling, and then firing up the Nintendo and being able to play as Hulk Hogan or play as Randy Savage, or if you liked your villains, the Honky Tonk Man and the $1 Million Man. I liked playing as everybody. In fact, to this day, one of my things I like to do in a game is I like to play one match with every character. And sometimes I'll just sit down and I'll do it, and I'll play one match with every character, and I'll do it in 5 or 6 different clusters. But eventually I'll play one match with every character in a game, and I still do that to this day. I have not done it yet with WWE 2K23. And that's because, to be frankly honest, I've been creating with that game more than I've been playing. I think on my PlayStation, it says I've got over 115 or 125 hours logged. I'd be willing to guarantee you about half of that time is thanks to creating and recording and exporting and that sort of stuff. But with WrestleMania, going back to that, I loved playing with everybody because these were the guys that I was seeing on my TV on Saturdays and on Mondays for primetime wrestling. I didn't really get to watch pay-per-views back in the day, so Saturdays and Mondays. Really, mostly Saturdays because Mondays were a late show, but I would get to record them every once in a while back in the primetime days. But taking these larger-than-life characters and bringing them down to the small screen was just a joy, especially at the time where, like I said, my mother was in bad health and I was not able to stay with her because she was not living at home. We needed our escape. And thanks to that auntie, it's funny, this auntie and I have had, we had a falling out over the years, and I don't have any contact with her, but I will give her this amount of credit. She made that point in life far more bearable than I think it would have been with anybody else, because she went out of her way to make sure that, almost like I was shielded from what was going on, that I was escaping that reality as much as humanly possible. And thanks to WWF Wrestlemania on the Nintendo and the Jungle Book, which we didn't really talk about a whole lot because it wasn't really the focus of this episode, but the Jungle Book VHS, WrestleMania, the Nintendo game, and I guess we got to give honorable mention to Wendy's, the fast food restaurant. It was during that era that I discovered the square burger on a round bun, and I hated it. But at the same time, the junior hamburger is probably why I still, when I go to Wendy's to this day, I'll order 3 of them. It's probably because it takes me back to that. And literally, as I'm sitting here recording this episode, it's dawning on me in real time that maybe that's why I like that burger, that simple, tiny-ass little burger, so much. Because it's a callback to a time where life was chaotic, and we were pulling escapes wherever we could. And for me, like I said a few moments ago, it was WrestleMania on the Nintendo, Jungle Book on VHS, Wendy's square burgers on round buns, and of course, our Saturday and occasional Monday WWF. Because at that point, I had not yet discovered WCW. I will tell you, though, that when I did discover WCW, quick little sidebar, it made, when guys jumped between promotions, it made it all the more easier. Like when Steve Austin, for example, jumped from WCW to ECW in the middle, but I didn't know about ECW yet, so to me, he went from WCW to WWE. I was confused why he wasn't called Stunning Steve Austin, because I still didn't really understand the inner workings of wrestling yet in 1996 when he came over, or 95, whenever it was. But I knew who he was, thanks to watching WCW from like, I don't know, I think I got into WCW in late 91, early 92. Yeah, my timelines always get very skewed, but I want to say it was late 91 that I got into WCW, and then by 92 we were into WWE and WCW, and by middle of 92 wrestling was taken away from me. Timelines are almost irrelevant as long as you get the story right. And I definitely got the story right. Behavioral issues, an obsession, so they took it away. And then eventually they gave it back when they realized the obsession was not going away. All right, well, I think that's a good pilot episode. I think there's only so much you can talk about WrestleMania on the Nintendo. You know, I could go in depth on the gameplay and the controls and all that, and I'll just say, if you like a hokey 8-bit wrestling game and you like the WWF and you like wrestling history, you should go and experience the game. If you've got a Nintendo, you can pick up a cartridge as cheap as like $10. You can access it through other means of which I will not advise people on because some of them are not legal. But you can go about your ways of playing the game. But I would recommend, if you've got a Nintendo or even one of those third-party 3-in-1 gimmicks that plays like Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and Sega cartridges, go pick you up a WrestleMania cartridge. Again, it's cheap enough, and you'll have a good time for a little while, and then you won't. And that's WrestleMania in a nutshell for you. You have a good time, then you won't. All right. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this first pilot episode of the Unnamed Podcast. Could it be 8-bits and Dropkicks? Could it be Dropkicks and Joysticks? Could it be something entirely different? Hopefully I had it figured out before I posted this episode. If you liked what you were listening to here, feel free to follow me out on social media at BloodyBillVox. I'm on just about every platform you can think of. We talked about it earlier on, but I will run that list down one more time again. So it's at BloodyBillVox on Twitch, YouTube, Kick, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, the PlayStation Network, Teespring, and Ko-fi. If you really like what you're seeing here, you can follow that Ko-fi link and you buy me a cup of coffee. You drop me a few bucks to buy some coffee. I like coffee. In fact, I probably should go buy another coffee today. But I'd like to thank you for tuning in, whether it was in audio form on whatever platform I've managed to throw this on. Hopefully by the next episode I'll have a better idea so it's not so general, but that's why it's a pilot. Thank you for listening on whatever audio platform you're listening on, and if you're watching on YouTube or Ko-fi or wherever I decided to land the video, I appreciate you tuning in for that. Until next time, I've been Bloody Bill Vox, and this is the Unnamed Podcast. Bye-bye.